This is XDefiant. We're here on Xbox Series S. Be sure to like the video. Subscribing is great as well. So what are we getting here? Looks like it's 1440p at 60 FPS. You die super fast because the time to kill is ridiculously insane. And there's still some server connection issues with lots of lag and whatnot, but you know, this is a beta, so obviously things are going to improve for the full game, and this is why, as always, we flight. There's HDR support, and there's also a field of view option that you can adjust from the settings. Right stick, right there, field of view. You can also adjust your HDR settings from, I think it's, yeah, the video setting right here if you want to adjust the HDR styling of the game. So this is a free-to-play shooter that is basically a collection of the various Ubisoft franchises kind of cosplaying, or, well, individual soldiers cosplaying as the different factions of, like, Ubisoft properties. We've got things like Splinter Cell, we've got things such as Watch Dogs, or Far Cry, or there's also us getting shot like crazy. The Division. There's, because they actually changed the faction here. Phantoms from Future Soldier. So there you go. Or, sorry, the Future Soldiers, the Phantoms from Ghost Recon, stuff like that. And they all have like different abilities. You create your own class. You have your own styling, your own shooting style. And you go about fighting across a variety of different game modes. Everything is objective based. This used to have the branding of like the Tom Clancy property, but they took that off of this one. Probably because it's a little silly and comically fast-paced for Tom Clancy styling. But what they've essentially done, and it doesn't really show it in this map as well, is they've kind of just carved out pieces of like the Division and turned those into full maps. Like most of the maps in this game are literally segments of parts of like the open world from the Division games, and they've just literally turned them into multiplayer maps, which probably saved on development time a lot and allowed them to produce more content for this game. And with that, there actually is some variety to the maps. There's a good selection of smaller levels, and then there is a few larger maps. So the larger maps are for things like, there's this game called Escort, where you are essentially escorting a massive kind of like mech robot dog thing of sorts, and it's like multi-tiered. And there's also like, there's like this terrain game mode that sort of uses it too. It's like basically territories from like Halo essentially, but with like a progressional kind of push mechanic that takes place over the large scale map. So it's quite an interesting concept in that regard. But like I said, it feels very floaty and very fast, this game. And I do think they maybe need to do some adjustments in that regard, like just kind of tighten up the controls. I also find the Far Cry lady a little annoying because she's got like these, like kind of like painkiller slash juggernaut essentially is her ability. And that in itself can get like, you know, kind of annoying to deal with because they just, you know, have lots of extra health all the time, which is a little bit annoying. But yeah, all the different like character classes have their own kind of like styling to them. You know, like you'll see my ultimate coming up here, it's at 89%. We're the Splinter Cell faction, so we go to like a night vision kind of shoot thing, or at least this particular character does, because there's a few different characters too within each faction, and they all have differing abilities. So, you know, that kind of impacts the gameplay as well. As you see, these characters unleash different options for combat and stuff like that. So that's kind of neat. It also does make it feel a little silly almost too. Again, the whole them cosplaying as the different factions. You know, that kind of makes me think a little bit of this game that was called Gotham City Imposters that existed back in the day. So that one was like, you know, you had two different sides sort of like cosplaying as like Batman and cosplaying as Joker, and they were shooting each other with like silly weapons and stuff. And this one kind of seems like a little bit more of a mature version of that, if that makes sense. So I'm definitely, you know, I'm intrigued by this. Like, I think it's cool. I think it has potential. But I really do think this one can kind of go either way, gameplay-wise, and whether or not this really hits the mass appeal. Like, obviously, being a free-to-play, I think a lot of people are really going to be interested in, you know, checking it out, taking a look at it, and stuff like that. But it doesn't really hit the tactical crowd, necessarily, in regards to, like, gameplay and stuff. Like, it is very, like, overly fast. Like, humans don't move this quickly. And when you think of, like, you know, Ubisoft franchises, especially a lot from where this is being pulled from, you think of more tactical experiences. I mean, obviously a lot of those have been like open worldified at this point, but you know, you still do think of it from the angle of like slightly realism. Like the Tom Clancy games, a lot of them, you know, futuristic, right? They had future abilities and mechs and toys, but they were still grounded in the realms of, like, I would say reality, in the sense that they were, you know, futuristic, but they were also very much trying to be like, hey, this is where things could go, this is where future combat could be like, you know, where it could be headed. It never felt really, like, kind of silly, whereas a lot of this kind of seems really quite silly. And that's not bad. Like, you know, I like my shooter games, I don't mind different types of shooter games. It's just going to be, I think, a little jarring for some of the people that are used to a little bit more tactical gameplay, jumping in here and being like, well, it is objective focus, the game modes. You are moving insanely fast, shooting at each other, and there's, like, you know, basically comical perk abilities and stuff like that. But like I said, I do kind of like this. I do find it kind of fun. It is pretty engaging. There's a good sense of, like, I guess you would say, challenge and combat and skill. It's just, like, I think a little bit more fine-tuning and balancing is the biggest thing. You know, like, the shooting, the gunplay and stuff, and the movement, I think if you tighten it a little bit, because it's definitely feeling, you know, quite COD-like, I would say, right? But I think if you kind of tighten those controls up a little bit more, make it feel a little less floaty, like a little bit more grounded with movement and stuff, I think you've actually got, like, something pretty nice here. Because, like, visually, you know, it looks pretty good. Gameplay-wise, it runs pretty well. You know, you get the lag all cleaned up and stuff like that. Which, obviously, again, it's a beta. You know, they're playing around with the servers and testing things, and this is why we flight. But it is, you know, it's just an observation type thing. They do seem to have a lot of different kind of, like, guns and leveling things, and then there's, like, cosmetics and stuff. They're practicing with their battle pass, so you can kind of get an idea of where it's headed, you know, in regards to, like, monetization, stuff like that. I think it's going to mostly be cosmetic and whatnot, but it does seem like, you know, maybe factions will be included in that. Like, there's the potential to grow this. That's what I was talking about, the Juggernaut perk. It's just annoying. But there is potential to, you know, grow this down the road. There are other franchises and stuff, like Ubisoft franchises, that I think they could, you know, incorporate in this game. And I think those would expand it further. So it's going to be interesting, because they could also do, if you really wanted to, I guess you could do, like, guest shooting franchises. That would be interesting, but we'll have to wait and see where they're going to take this. Close loss. Still a loss. Let's jump into the next match here. So yeah, I'm really quite curious to see where they'll take this one, how this one will continue to grow over time. I think, though, for, like, a beta, it's pretty well polished, it's pretty good looking, it has a good amount of content to it. I like the game modes, I like the concept that they're going for in general. It's a bit, you know, I think it's a bit silly, some of the stuff, like, you know, doing the whole factions in this regard. I thought it was, like, really silly kind of from, like, day one of seeing it first revealed, but it does kind of work, and it does kind of work as, like, a little bit of a different shooter, and it's I'd say it's a lot better than I thought it was going to be, is the biggest thing. I was, like, pretty low expectations, but as I always say, I like shooter games. I like a variety of different shooter games. It's always nice to have something different, but it's also, like, it feels really quite familiar, just because it literally, you know, so much of the content, you know, from the Division stuff. So it's like, oh, okay. It makes those assets so cleanly work in this one too. Oh, that's like a shield protection. That's not good. But yeah, as long as they clean up the sort of like lag stuff and everything like that, they get the servers all running smoothly, tighten stuff, you have a very competent, pretty well put together shooter that's got a bit of good branding behind it. Even though I do find the whole naming concept to be just a little ridiculous, because it's, you know, it's XDefiant. It's like, what does that even mean? like legitimately, it's like cross-defiant. Are they defying the fact that they shouldn't, like, the universes shouldn't be like impacting each other, or like, I'm just having a really big breakthrough here and trying to figure out where that naming comes from. It's like, what does that even mean? XDefiant. XDefiant of what? I think that's what it is, because it used to be, what it was, Tom Clancy's XDefiant or something. So, well, I guess that doesn't really make sense if you have non-Tom Clancy stuff, unless you want to rebrand the whole Far Cry and Watch Dogs thing. But that is such a, like, I'm assuming that is what it means, right? It's like cross-defiant of, like, you know, that these things shouldn't interact with each other, but they are now because Ubisoft wills it. Also getting some screen tearing on this map, which is interesting. I don't usually get that on all the levels. Huh. That is fascinating. I don't know if you saw those, but there's a few little spots of screen tearing, so a little bit more polishing, I guess, needed for the Series S video stuff, but I don't think you'll notice it if it's that minimal. Yeah, that was like a brief kind of second there. Huh. But, yeah, they've got something, I think, pretty good going on here. Like, I've played a good amount of time with this one, so I definitely, you know, have the familiarity with it at this point. And, yeah, it does actually flow pretty well. And it does have good variety with the flow. I wonder how much the trickle-out content's going to be like, too. They claim to have a lot kind of planned for this game. And if that's the case, you know, that's good, too. Because I think that's a big failing for a lot of like games like this, these live service shooter games, is just like not keeping people in it by having steady outflow. Like, you gotta have basically everything perfect these days. You gotta have that great core gameplay that people love. You gotta keep them, you know, going by constantly having new things for them to do. It's gotta be engaging. It can't be too frustrating, but it's also gotta be challenging. And yeah, there's a lot to do. There's a lot of competition. It's a very saturated market, and that's what I was saying earlier on in the, you know, in the video and stuff, which I'm assuming you're still watching. You know, my big thing was, like, I could see this going either way, and then what that ultimately really means is it's either going to be like successful, or it just really isn't going to be, or, you know, I guess it could potentially end up somewhere in the middle, but, like, I don't know. I think there's some good stuff for this one. There's some good stuff against this one. And I'm just really going to be fascinated to see what the general response is going to be. Because there, you know, we've got, like, the crossplay and stuff, so that's good for player base and that. But, like, you know, with so many shooter options out there, and I know it's free to play, and I know it's got some good branding behind it, even though it's not necessarily carrying that branding in regards to its, like, naming convention and, like, advertising conventions, but, like, yeah, it's a weird one, because it's like, are you kind of alienating that, like, sort of Tom Clancy, that tactical community by doing this sort of branding and or silly style? Or are you maybe inviting them to try something a little bit different? Are you able to capture the more casual community of people that play shooter games for this particular title? Or is that not going to work? I am just so genuinely curious about this one. I know that sounds really silly from someone that's, like, you know, just reviewing this one and supposed to be giving my thoughts on it, but, like, I really do kind of sit here and I'm just, like, pondering how this one is going to actually fare in the market that exists today. Oh, and another thing I really need to mention too is they need to touch up the vibration on this one. Like, I did a Series X video as well on this one, and I should have been mentioning it more throughout this video, but, like, basically... Oh, controller battery's dying too, which doesn't help, but... When the controller battery's not dying, it is a little hard in this one to tell when you're taking damage and when you're getting shot and stuff. Like, obviously, the time to kill is, like, really fast. Sorry, I'm just putting in new batteries. So the time to kill is really fast. So you need, like, really good, you know, controller vibration in order to react accordingly. And, like, sometimes you don't even feel vibration when you're getting shot, and sometimes it hits a little after, or, like they need to kind of up the vibration usage in situations where you are directly being impacted by an opposing force, essentially, is what needs to be adjusted a little bit on this one, too. And that is, you know, really, really important, because that's a big part of, like, controller gameplay for games and shooters, is you have to have that vibration just done perfectly right, so that, you know, players are able to feel and react accordingly. Because if that's not done right, that takes away a whole advantage and aspect of why you would use, say, a controller, is that you actually have that sensitive connection to, you know, what's going on. And to me, that's a big part of the experience. So I'm hoping they do clean that up a bit as well, alongside the controls, but you know, it does feel pretty good to play. It does all seem to handle pretty well. I think they've got something here that has that potential. I just don't know if it's going to fully catch on with the, you know, the larger audience. It must be like a really hard thing to do. Like, I'm sure a lot of the pitching meetings were like, we're going to take, you know, the gameplay from these other games to cut our time down for development. And we're going to make a game that's for the tactical audience, but it's also going to be for everyone. So it's like, we're going to have these really, really intense things, but we're also going to have a lot of silly stuff too. And yeah, so it's going to be the game for all, but the game for some. You know what I mean? Like, I just imagine the debate on that one would have been quite an interesting board discussion. They're like, okay, well, I mean, obviously they got the funding, otherwise we wouldn't see this, right? And we continue with the most Division-like map that we've seen out of the collection we got today, but yeah, you can really tell, though, like, there's lots of fun little details. It's just so sad that some of these bears, like, this bear is just alone. He's cool with his hat, but he's, you know, he's alone. I knocked his hat off! I am so sorry, sir. But yeah, there's a lot of little small details in this one. There's a lot in this that actually I think is going to be intriguing to some people. I think it's definitely something worth, like, giving a whirl to see if you like it. But it should feel Call of Duty-like, but with the, you know, the flair of the competitive franchises that you might have loved from, you know, Ubisoft in the past. I see the potential for growth on this one being additional franchises, maybe even some guest franchises. If it continues to grow down the line, you know, I'm sure they'll add more maps and content over time with new seasons. I'm sure there'll be... There's lots of avenues for how this one can kind of grow. You know, there's lots they can do with it. Lots of cosmetic stuff, lots of battle passes. You know, the same old usual stuff. I don't think this one necessarily does anything too wildly insane with, like, the shooter genre, like we haven't seen from before. But at the same time, it does shooting quite well. It does areas and environments quite well. It feels unique a little bit. Feels different. The abilities are kind of interesting. Adds, like, a little bit of a hero shooter angle to it. And it's either going to hit really, really well, or I don't know, or it'll go the opposite way. So I'm very curious to see, you know, the end game results of this one. So far, let's just say I am definitely intrigued. I am interested in seeing the full scale of this launch of this one and seeing how it's supported in the long term. I just hope for some, you know, kind of adjustments here or there. And I think they've got a pretty well put together shooter game that actually can be quite fun to play and quite enjoyable to compete in, even though I do tend to die really fast because the time to kill is crazy and the speed is ludicrous speed. You move way, way too fast in this one. But still having a good time with it. And, you know, it's kind of what matters for shooter games, is something that you kind of jump into, blast some foes, and, you know, have a good time with and see where it kind of leads you as you continue to play it over time.